Welcome, everybody, to this episode. I want to introduce my friend, Michael Drescher. He's the Federal Business Development and Program Management Executive at TCG. We both participated in the 2018 ACT-IAC Partners Leadership Development Program. We're both vice chairs, him from the industry side, me from the government side, on the 2020 ACT-IAC Associates Leadership Development Program. And he's a good friend, and I love having a conversation with you, Michael, because you always have a unique perspective on the world. So thank you for joining me today.
No, thank you for having me.
So those who don't know you like I do, who have not had a chance to hear the interesting things over drinks and other avenues of conversation, explain who you are, where you're from. Just tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, as you sort of alluded to, I have a little bit of a screwy and varied background. I grew up in a tiny town called Anaconda, Montana. For those listening, I'm usually people's first Montanan. No one ever meets anyone from Montana, and there aren't that many of us. So that's usually something people remember me for that sticks out in their mind. But I grew up there in a fifth or sixth generation Montana family, and my dad didn't go to school. He was a Vietnam War vet and bartender and mailman. And my mom was a librarian at the middle school and teacher of many, many things. And so it was a very different place to grow up than the world we occupy now here in the DC metro area. And I've developed an interest in all things kind of scientific, technological, and mechanical, probably from an early age. I remember getting my first Commodore 64 as a kid and taking a class on basic programming. Although I should say I'm not a technologist by any stretch of the imagination. So I'll just throw that out there. That's why I'm in business development, right? So I always had an interest in those types of things growing up and in music, which are often maybe strange bedfellows on their face, but music's a very mathematical and logical discipline as well. So I grew up training as a classical pianist and supplementing my scientific interest with my musical interests. And after high school, I ended up going to college on a music scholarship to Arizona State University. And in a period of 4 years, kind of made my way from music to thinking I wanted to go to medical school. So I ended up finishing with a degree in zoology and a strong emphasis in chemistry, and then deciding not to go to medical school. And I ended up getting an offer to come work in Washington for the summer after I graduated at the Bureau of Indian Affairs as a management analyst. So that was my first job out of college. I spent a summer there interning in the commissioner's office of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And it was a pretty eye-opening introduction to government. And then spent a couple years working in the nonprofit sector, all in and around environmental issues. Where I grew up in Montana is actually the largest Superfund site. So for those of you who are familiar with the EPA and the Superfund program, Superfund is the list of hazardous waste sites that the government is identified and is working with industries to clean up. It's not the most toxic one, but by area it is the largest. So environmental concerns have always been important to me. And having grown up in that kind of environment, nonprofits really kind of drew me in early in my career. So I did that for a few years and then went to graduate school at Princeton, where I studied public policy and did a joint program in environment and technology policy, and which is sort of an applied engineering program. How do we use technology to make the world better? That's probably where I first got serious interest in technology. So I finished graduate school there in 1999, and I was actually recruited by a fellow Princeton alum, Tony Towns, who now runs Microsoft's regulated industries. And she was at Arthur Andersen at the time when there was an Arthur Andersen. And she recruited me to Arthur Andersen. So she was really my first kind of mentor and boss in the industry. And I spent time at Arthur Andersen, and that's how I kicked off my consulting career. and life's funny and accidental often. And 20 years later, I'm still in the industry, 7 or 8 firms later. And how I got from there to here, I don't always know every day.
I was going to say, I think it's not an uncommon story. First of all, you are my first Montanan, so thank you.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
I'll have to put a pin in my board of people I know from different states.
Even being in the military, you never encountered any, huh?
I didn't. Yeah, I didn't.
Military, I imagine you encounter people from all over the place.
All over the place, but not Montana. That's interesting. But I would say, but it's also not uncommon to hear somebody from who's in our industry to have a music background as well. There
Yeah.
seems to be some similarities in terms of how that works out. And it's also not uncommon to hear you just fell into IT. And that's what I kind of heard. I want to make sure I dive in on that. So it sounds like you fell into IT just through the consulting practice. Would that be accurate?
And again, I am not a technologist. I've never developed an application in my life. I've never administered a system. I am not a technologist. I did just kind of fall into IT. And, for people around our age, I think it's common also because we became professionals in sort of the golden age of IT.
Sure.
It was the birth of the internet. It was the birth of doing all this stuff with technology that people had dreamed of for half a century, but hadn't come to fruition yet. And we were entering the workforce at a time when all that was starting to happen very fast. So in some ways, part of it is falling into it. Part of it was survival. If you wanted to survive and be successful at work, you had to become a technologist in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say. I mean, you're saying you're not a technologist. That's fine, right? But within the IT portfolio of work and within businesses that do work in the IT sector, technologists are not the only thing you need, right? You need people like you. I mean, I think there's been some announcements lately for some great contracts that you've won for TCG, which is pretty awesome, right? That work has to happen too, right? You have to be able to make the case for why your firm or why your capability is the one that somebody wants.
Absolutely, yeah. And it isn't just about the very, very ridiculously smart people who code and develop applications, right? You need people to develop user interfaces. You need people to analyze requirements. You need people to do all the financial analysis and business case around why you should invest in technology. You need people to think big thoughts about what the future holds so that we're ready for it when it comes. And you need people to think strategically and globally, especially in this sector, about the 330 million Americans that we're all trying to serve, whose lives we're trying to simplify and make better in how they interact with their government. And I'm a huge, passionate believer in that.
Wow, I would agree with you there as well. So, well, that's how you ended up in IT. So I don't have to ask a question around that. And I appreciate that your way of falling into IT. I think one of the reasons I do this interview series is try to expose to people there are multitudes of ways to get into this field.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now that you've been in this field for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and you've seen the way we do work and you see the way we don't do work, what's something you would change if today they gave you the power for the day to go forth and make the IT industry and the work that we do better in some way? What would it be from your perspective?
Well, I know a lot of work has been done on it, and I don't want to negate the efforts of many, many smart people who've worked on this issue. But one on my list would be acquisition reform.
Hmm.
And I'm probably saying that because we've just ended a fiscal year where everyone gets slammed. The government has 40 to 60% of their budget left on August 1st to spend. Contracting officers are stretched thin. Cores and program officers are stretched thin. Everyone in the industry is stretched thin. So I fully acknowledge all that could be a matter of timing, but it just doesn't feel like it should be this hard.
Hmm.
It just doesn't feel like it should be so hard to uh, to to put out RFPs and request services from the industry and have industry respond and then get the work done. And again, not for the purpose of, ooh, I'm this company and I won, or I'm that company and I won, but for the purpose of modernization and serving the American public. The more we delay all of that, the more obsolete existing technology gets. And really, it's just the American citizen that suffers.
Well, I would say, because I'm on the government side, I would agree
Right.
with you. Then rushing something out the door at the last minute also doesn't necessarily serve anyone, because then and you have to select somebody, right? You're not
Right.
giving yourself an opportunity to say, "Ooh, maybe we need to change this." There's no time for change. You have to make an award and you need to move forward.
Right. So, and then that gets into the nitty gritty of funding streams. Why does it all have to be 1 year money?
Right.
And I know we're making progress on that with some of the recent legislation, working capital funds getting set up, the technology modernization fund. There's a lot of really great steps in the right direction. But as the saying goes, it moves at the speed of government. There's good reasons for that. But just speaking for myself, that would be one of the things I would change. I'm not pointing the finger at the government. Industry has culpability too. I was talking recently with a colleague how when I got into the industry 20 years ago, protests were a very rare thing, and
Mm.
you just didn't see them that much unless there was serious merit that someone had really made a mistake. And now you go into pretty much every bit, assuming there's going to be pre-proposal protests, in-flight protests, post-award protests, and I blame industry for that.
Mm.
There's a lot of greediness and unreasonableness. Sometimes you just have to accept that you weren't the winner. There's a good reason you're not.
Right.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Since I'm on one side of it, it's always great to hear the other side of that as well.
Yeah.
So, where do you see yourself, or maybe the work you do in our industry? How is that going to change in the future? I mean,
Yeah.
I can hear what you wish would change, right?
Right.
But where do you see it changing?
Well, as I said, I think some of the recent changes in regulation, like with FITARA and a push towards TBM, and with a singular event like the pandemic,
Mm.
uh, kind of forcing some people's hands about how we change work and how we fund that work. So whether that's through the modernization fund or other avenues, it feels like we're at a moment of change where some of these initiatives might really get some momentum, and we might be able to do things different. It's so hard though to have a crystal ball. All the rage now. I mean, I know you're involved in the emerging tech koi with that Gaiac, and I want to start a drinking game at any meeting, whether it's that koi or even just any IT, government IT related meeting, a drinking game, that revolves around RPA or cloud
Blockchain.
or blockchain, or yeah, I mean, or machine learning or artificial intelligence, right? Those five, you could have a pretty good time if you played a drinking game around
Right.
those. Uh, my fear is we get stuck on these buzzwords and ideas without thinking through the practicalities of whether it's really what we need, especially when on the other side of the coin you see IRS putting out RFPs for COBOL developers and running 40-year-old mainframes. I mean, it's a big enough market that maybe there's room for all, but if I were king for a day, I'd love to address some of those legacy issues, like aging infrastructure or obsolete technologies, whether that's on the software or hardware side, before we jump headfirst into the future and throw around a lot of terms that we might not have a lot of understanding around anyway, and whether they're even applicable or needed in the U.S. government technology space.
Wow, I would agree. So what about yourself personally? Where are you headed in your career? Right, you've been around the block. You've done this interesting thing for 20 years. Somehow stumbled into it. Is this it for you, or you got some big plans?
Yeah, it's a good question. I I haven't been able to figure out my trajectory thus far. If you ask 19-year-old Michael, I probably would have been back in small town Montana practicing medicine, um, living a quiet life with a white picket fence. Clearly, that didn't happen, and that's probably good. That may not have been the right path for me, but it's just hard to say. I have a tale of two careers, even as it is, where I spent the first 10 years of my career in big firms and a big, well, it was big eight, then big six, then big five, then big four style firms, the big accounting and technology integration firms. And for 10 years, my only goal was make partner, make partner, make partner. Well, it didn't happen. And so I kind of had to reinvent myself and look at ways to do things differently. And for the last 10 years, I've just been in a series of small firms. And the way you do work in small firms is very different than the way you do work in big firms. Similarly, I spent the first large part of my career in more delivery and program management roles. And, now I'm in a pure sales role. So it's really hard to say what's next. I do know what matters to me now more than it did 10 years ago or 20 years ago is being around people I like and having fun at work and feeling like I'm making a positive impact. And those things have become more important to me than climbing the ladder, achieving the next salary benchmark or next title benchmark. I want to be somewhere where I have fun and enjoy the culture. And at least for now, TCG is absolutely it. I know our firm a little bit and have done work with this. And I know every firm says they're different, but TCG is kind of wacky. We're just we're a wacky kind of firm. It's unconventional, and I like that. It keeps me guessing. It keeps me on my toes, and I'm having a lot of fun. So as long as I'm having a lot of fun, I'll stick around and keep doing what I'm doing. Plus, I haven't found a way to replace my income from drinking martinis and playing the piano. Now,
maybe
if you know someone, if you know someone who would pay me to just do that, then I'll tell you what I'm going to spend the rest of my days doing. But I haven't found that yet.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, any other parting words of wisdom before we close out for the day?
Oh, words of wisdom. You kicked us off by talking about the leadership programs we've been in, both as participants in the Partners Program and now as mentors and leaders in the Associates Program. I think my words of wisdom are less about technology in the industry and more about leadership in business, which are just give back. Give back where you can. None of us might feel like we have the answers or stories to share or perspectives that will help someone. But to me, that's some of the most rewarding work I've done in my career is the stuff I'm not getting paid for. Is helping new staff at a firm or in the industry kind of make their way through and navigate. Working with my brethren on the government side, trying to solve big problems, joint big problems, and not necessarily for the sake of I want to get this next contract and you want to get your next promotion, but because there's an intellectual interest and a passion, and we think that through sharing thoughts and ideas, we can help each other personally and professionally. So giving back is a big part of it in my worldview and philosophy, and have fun. No one will ever say, "Oh, I should have had more fun," or they will say they wish they had more fun. No one will ever say they had too much, right?
Right.
And it's a fun industry. You meet a lot of really, really interesting and smart people, and so take advantage of those opportunities to do that. COVID or no COVID.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great shout out to ACT-IAC. I'll make sure to put a link to their website in the description for this video so we can.
Yeah, or other organizations. Doesn't have to be them, right?
No, there's plenty of them, but I know, but you and I both have gotten a lot of,
absolutely.
Great interaction from that. And it's all volunteer, right? So we're doing it for free. So, well, thank you so much for joining me today, Michael. This has been a great conversation. I love it that every time I talk to you, I get to know you just a little bit better and hear more things that I never knew. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Jeremy. I really appreciate you taking the time and inviting me to participate.